have a number of speakers on Bill 27, the Flood Recovery and Reconstruction Act. The Honourable Minister for Regional Recovery and Reconstruction for Southwest Alberta, followed by the Honourable Member for Arimby, Rocky Mountain House Sundre. Honourable Minister.
That there is. That there is. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to rise and speak to this particular bill, Bill 27, the Flood Recovery and Reconstruction Act, as a minister that has been very much involved in this from about 24 to 48 hours after the floods have subsided. And I do want to talk briefly about some of the stuff that's in this bill, particularly the policies that this bill is enacting around developments in floodway. I appreciate the last exchange, and Madam Speaker, I think that's good debate, but I do want to clarify a few things. First of all, this bill provides regulation-making authority to the Minister to restrict development in what's called a floodway. This is very distinct from what is the flood fringe. And in fact, so much of what we heard in the aftermath of the flood, we talked about flood plains or flood hazards or all sorts of nomenclature that is good for public debate, but when it comes down to making policy decisions and decisions what's in this particular bill, it actually just clouds the fact. What we do as a province is we do flood mapping, and I guess you could call the whole thing a sort of flood hazard. And the two particular areas that we're really concerned about as a province within that flood hazard is called a flood. One is the floodway, one is the flood fringe. What defines the floodway is it's a particularly scientific way of looking what happens during a flood event and how the water reacts. In a floodway, Madam Speaker, what you have is water that flows at a particularly high rate, at a particularly high volume, and there's a channel that it's usually geared towards. And the water flows at such a high rate and such a high volume that it is very destructive. It will take out man-made structures. And one of the reasons why we're bringing this forward and why our policy is to restrict any future development in those areas is twofold, Madam Speaker. And this is something that I wanted to bring up as part of this bill because I'm not sure this is widely understood. The first thing is the obvious, is the financial liability that exists when you have structures that are destroyed during a flood event. So a house, we saw many of the pictures of houses floating down the river, other physical structures, because those were typically in the floodway, and like I said, that's typically defined by waters that flow fast enough and strong enough that they'll destroy structures. And that's certainly financially damaging when you have to repair a whole structure instead of just maybe mopping up, cleaning up, and fixing a bit of drywall. But so the financial liability is huge in this particular area, and I think most Albertans understand that. The second part about the floodway, Madam Speaker, is that when you do have houses or structures move in a flood event, it becomes a public safety issue. So we have first responders that are operating, trying to save life and limb, as they like to say, in a flood event, whether it's rescuing people, animals, trying to protect other infrastructure. And what you have is the potential of these structures now floating down the stream at them at a very high rate in the river because the water's floating that way. So it's not just, this policy just doesn't make sense for limiting future financial liabilities, Madam Speaker. It's actually a public safety issue as well, and that's a piece that actually gets lost in the debate around this particular policy. The last thing I just want to touch about is this is based off of flood mapping, Madam Speaker, and those decisions will be based off of the maps that exist today, and there's no doubt that some of those maps need to be changed. One of the things that we need to remember, Madam Speaker, is that those maps are mapped to a 1 in 100 year standard. And that's very important to remember because I know most people are concerned and they're confused and they're saying, well, it doesn't make sense. How come I got flooded but I'm not in a floodway or a flood fringe and vice versa? Madam Speaker, the big challenge is that obviously in many of the flood events that happened this past June in this province, much of it was actually over and above the 100-year standard. That's why you would have water in places that might not be mapped. because it's over a 1 in 100 year standard. Finally, Madam Speaker, the one thing around flood mapping that I think everybody should recognize is that in a flood event, many, many different things happen, and they're happening on a very fast and rapid basis. And it's very hard to predict, scientifically or non-scientifically, things that happen during this event. Much of it is frankly man-made. And a great example is Hart Creek in the hamlet of Lac des Arcs in the MD of Bighorn, where what had happened was the creek was flooding and was going one way. A whole bunch of debris came up against the guy's fence, clogged the fence, and redirected it a completely different way. Well, that might have been the natural way that the creek wanted to go. But it ended up going a completely different way, Madam Speaker, because of that fence sort of acting like a dam. You know, that's something that is very difficult to predict ahead of time, and it's why some of these things are very unpredictable. What we need to do is realize that what we're trying to do is not an exact prediction of what's exactly going to happen during a flood event, but create a policy tool for planning. And that's what flood mapping is about. It's a tool for planning, and it's a tool for allowing us to identify some of these things, like restricting development in floodways, those types of things that are in this bill, for us to make sure that we're better prepared for next time, and that we look at those challenges such as future financial liability and possible public safety issues. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. 29-2A. The Honourable Member from Edmonton Centre.
Thank you very much to this. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were a minister now. Totally missed that. I'm sorry. I'm just thank you very much for getting up to say what you said. But I am still curious how we were supposed to know that from what's available in this bill, where in section something sub 3, it's telling us that those definitions of floodways will come from the Lieutenant Governor and Council may make these regulations, and that includes under Section D defining or respecting the meaning of floodway for the purposes of this section and the regulations made under this section. So how exactly were we supposed to understand what you just told us, telling us all that we should understand it, when in fact the regulations haven't been made yet but will be made upon the passage of the bill? Do you see what I mean? We've got the cart before the horse here a little bit. So I'm asking how people were supposed to understand that. And secondly, where you have communities that are already built in 100-year floodplains, there's total uncertainty for them here. We don't know whether there's going to be a caveat placed on their property. They were already allowed to develop under the blessing of the municipality of the time. So I don't know if it's possible to mitigate at this point. What are they supposed to do? Get higher? I don't know. You're supposed to, prop them up and stick another foundation under them? Like, what's reasonable here? And the bill is nothing but uncertainty. I can't go back to the people that are asking me this question and answer it for them, because there's nothing in the bill that tells me what they're going to do, except for things like controlling, regulating, or prohibiting any use or development of land that is located in a floodway, undefined, I'll note, within a municipal authority, including, without limitation, regulations specifying the types of developments that are authorized in a floodway. Okay, fair enough. What am I supposed to tell these people? They're already there. They were blessed by the then municipality to be there. What are they supposed to do in the future? Do they always have this uncertainty hanging over them that at any point the government can decide to control, regulate, or prohibit because they're already in a floodplain? What are they supposed to do? There's no certainty for them. There's no certainty now, and there's no certainty in the future for them. So, could you answer that? Yeah.
Honourable Associate Minister.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that this honourable member's got caught up over the last a year and a half, but it's been that long since I've been an associate minister over here, Madam Speaker. But anyways, what I do want to say is that this is specifically in any policy that the government wants to bring in to restrict or prohibit development in floodways will be specifically in regards to any new or future development. Those developments in place will be allowed to remain in place. And we've been quite clear what our policy intent is going to be, Madam Speaker, and that is if you live in a floodway, you certainly have access to the disaster recovery program for a flood event, and if you are impacted by a flood, you will then have an option to go to the disaster recovery program and get your eligible recovery assistance through the program, or go work through the government through our floodway buyout program to get you moved out. And that's all that this is doing. And again, I don't know where this member has been, Madam Speaker, for the last, 4 months, but we've been quite clear on these policies. We've been talking about it. We've been trying to make these policies in a timely manner so that people that have been impacted can make a decision. That's always a big challenge, Madam Speaker. You probably know it takes a while to make sure you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed when it comes to making sound public policy. In the case of flood recovery, that's always a challenge. How do you make sure all of those details are taken care of while providing timely information to people? That's something that we've tried to deal with over the last 4 months, and I believe that through that process, it has been a bit of an iterative process, that we've come up with some very strong policies that are very much in line with the Groeneveld report that was released or done after the 2005 floods. We think that this is the right thing to do. This bill is going to allow us to do that, and it's pretty clear, Madam Speaker.